Okay, so we've seen a little bit about shading fur and masking fur using selection sets, using fur scope, and we've seen controlling fur with different types of textures. Now it's time to move on up to controlling fur with guides. So we're going to go ahead and, I'm not going to, we'll just delete that guy. Goodbye, cellular texture. So right now we're not modulating the fur shape in any way. It's just growing out willy-nilly. And it is time for us to modulate that a bit. So I'm going to go over to the paint layout, and I'm actually going to isolate these three groups here. Oops, not that one. So I'm just holding down Shift and double clicking. Now I'll hit Shift H, and that's going to hide everything that's not selected, and that gives me access to just the hull there. Well, the next thing I'm going to do is, just for cleanliness, I'm going to go to visibility here, and I'm going to turn off texture locators. I don't really need to see those here. And finally, let's do toggle work plane and grid. All right, nice clean 3D space to work. Now, to work with guides, first we have to go over to our hair tools options here, and there is a hair guides option. The first thing I will mention to you is that the density of the hair guides is based on the vertex positions. So because these little areas here have smaller polygons, you can see these are smaller essentially than these are, you're going to see more guides over here if we do them all at the same time. Check this out. So we activate the guides. We have a max number of guides right now set to 100. So now click in here. It's going to add 100 guides to our surface. Now, this mouse is a very small surface, so you'll notice, for instance, that the collision radius and the length are all pretty high. If we set this down to say, that's a little bit small, meant to do 10. All right, and then I'm going to bring my bend amount down because I don't really want it to be, in fact, for now, we're going to turn it down to 0 just so you can see these guys sticking out. Now, remember earlier when I was working with the fur, I didn't want it growing off the sides, so I really don't want the guides growing off the sides or the bottom as well, right? So what we want to do effectively is just isolate the surfaces where we want fur to appear. So let's go ahead and undo back out of there. Goodbye. And I'm going to right click and choose, looks like I didn't save my select, oh wait, I'm not on polygons. There we go. Recall selection set. And I'm going to choose the furry mouse type. Ba-boom. And I'm going to do a Shift H, hide unselected. And now I can work on just those polygons. It's often a good idea to isolate a specific surface before you do your hair guides, just to make sure you're getting the guides just where you want them to give you maximum control and performance. So once again, we activate the hair guides, and wow, they're still really, really bent. So let's make them straight just for fun, and let's set the length down to 10 millimeters. All right, there we go. There's a little porcupine mouse. Not bad. Certainly a good starting point. Now, I probably, for this model, don't really need 100 guides. So you can start to turn that down a little bit. Another thing I find myself doing, you see, for instance, that, as I mentioned earlier, the polygon density is higher up here than it is in the back. So sometimes, in fact, I'll just create hair guides on a per surface or per contiguous polyset basis. So in this case, I'll show you a quick trick here. Go ahead and bring up my info and stats panel. Go to polygons by type. Guides are just curves. So you can see here, there's our guides. Just select them. And now I can delete them. Nice way to get at them. I'm going to be using that trick later for sculpting the guides so we can isolate them from a different surface. All right, so what I'm going to do is say, just double click on this. And in fact, I want the guides largely inside of this area. And so I'm just going to say these, oops, like that. So I'll shift up. That's good. And now you see I have 36 polygons selected. I'll just set the number of guides to 36, and boom, now I have a nice guide per polygon. Okay, handy dandy. And then I can do the same thing up here. So I say, where do I want my guides? I just want them to be, here and here. Just do it on all the major surfaces. Don't need them there. Shift to add those back in. Okay. Easy enough. And once again, go to guides. This time I have 75 polygons. And this is probably overkill. I really don't need this many guides, but what the heck? Something to start with. Again, you can work with some bend here if you want to. This is a nice way to get things started. You see it's kind of pulling it based on gravity. You can also change it to the view direction, if you will, then reproject. But I just want to start with 0 there, so they're sticking straight up. Now, the other thing I'll notice is that I have some guides that probably don't need. Well, guess what? Just like I showed you earlier, you can always just go in there and select any guide you don't want. Just blow them away. It's just as easy as selecting a polygon and getting rid of it. So if I didn't want any of these here, just boom, gone. I don't particularly like these guys over here. Now, you see what's happening here? I'm paint selecting, and we don't differentiate between curves and polys. They're both polytype. So what I can do, if I want to make sure that as I'm editing in here, I don't ever select or edit any of my root polygons, I can double click on my face polygons and go over here to edit, lock selected. And now, when I do things like paint select, it makes it very convenient for working around those areas. You can see I can just get right in there, not have to worry about going in and paint selecting and deselecting face polys. Okay, so there you have the basics for adding some guides. The next thing we want to do is actually sculpt them a little bit. So, as you might have guessed, we have a series of tools here that we can use for sculpting the guides, and they're all pretty self-explanatory. We go over here and say comb. They work a lot like the sculpting tools, whether you're using a pen or a mouse. You can right mouse to change the brush size. I'm using the soft brush right now. And then you just kind of start to paint over. Just like the sculpting tools, the shift key will go into a smooth mode. And you can see that you really don't want to work with too many guides. It's really better to work with a smaller number of guides and give focus control over them instead of trying to control them en masse. But you can see very quickly we can sort of shape out and give them a part here in the middle. And then sometimes I just want to grab them like this. All right. Just giving a little bit of shape and randomness to it. Now you see I want them to be longer, but they're not getting any longer. All right, they have a fixed length, which is actually in some circumstances exactly what you want. If you want them to be longer, there is of course the stretch option, and it'll go either direction. So if you just start to paint, it basically cuts them. Hold down the Control key, and you'll get the opposite effect. So for instance, if we come over here and we say we want to shrink these in the back, shrink them in the front, and then make them nice and long in the middle. That, and then let's go ahead and curl these guys. Okay. All right, so you see it looks a little funky here in GL because we don't have a lot of guides. But if we head back over to our render palette, hit U for unhide, you'll see that at first glance you might say, hey, what's going on? It's not affecting my fur. Well, if we go to the fur material, and again I can select it here in the shader tree, or right click in the preview and just choose fur material, you'll see that on the fur shape, guides are set to none. They don't have an effect by default. So we just need to choose what effect we want. So if we want to say shape, you can see that now it's setting the shape based on the base shape of these guides. If we set this to direction and length, you see it's starting to control a little bit more. Now you'll notice again that it's not fully following the contour of the curve. We're going to need to crank up the length here. Let's set this to say 300. Wow, too much. Try 30. Okay, so starting to get a little bit more. So now you can see it's starting to follow along the contours there. Again, this particular option is following mostly from the base of the fur material. So if we change it to shape here, you see that this is now causing them to essentially follow the shape and length of the, or rather the shape of the guides. So for instance, if we change the length here, set this down to 10, you'll see that they are still following those guides, but they're just short. So what that means is over time I can actually have that animate up to sort of grow out hairs along those guides. And you can see that I can get a view of the side here. And of course with this view active, you can go in and work on sculpting these guides. Now I showed you earlier how we can go in and select some guides very quickly and delete them. And you see that that really doesn't affect the overall, it doesn't impact the effect too much, because what's happening is these guides are just acting as interpolators, so, or as guides in fact. So, and then the hairs themselves are interpolated from one guide to the next. So as I mentioned earlier, you really want to be fairly sparing, save yourself some headaches, and just use fewer guides and then control the ones you have very precisely, and then use the various styling tools to do that. You can even select a single guide hair, and by the way, the little palette here is very nice because while I'm in render I can bring this back up, but I can choose a single guide hair and then say, use my sculpting tools directly on that. So let's go ahead and go to comb here. Just have to comb that out and then maybe curl it a little. Looks like it doesn't have very many kinks in it. Again, select one here and move. So you see I can just directly grab that one hair now, isolate on that, and work with it directly. And again, you can see as I pull this apart, you start to see a little bit of separation in here, where these hairs are moving more towards that one, and the ones that are closer to this one are still trying to follow its contour, and the ones that are closer up here are still following along these. So that's roughly, or very quickly, how to work with guides. So now you should understand some of the basics on adding guides, massaging guides, as well as controlling the fur look and using textures to modulate all of the various fur attributes as well. So hopefully that'll get you started, and we're looking forward to seeing all the amazing things that you create. Enjoy.